Okay, as the council is aware, part of our public outreach efforts to inform and educate Virginia Beach residents about the flood protection program has been to engage experts who can evaluate the efforts and impacts. Our next presenter, Dr. Robert McNab, will share the results of his study analyzing the economic impact of recurrent flooding in Virginia Beach. Professor McNab is the director of the Dragas Center for Economic Analysis and Policy at the Strome College of Business at Old Dominion University. You have a full copy of the report along with a one-page summary of key findings. Dr. McNab, welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. As we go through this very short presentation, I would always welcome questions that you may have. The bottom line up front is fairly straightforward. What we did is take the work that had already been done by VB Stormwater and Dewberry Consulting and examined how the costs of building the current and proposed infrastructure compared to the damages that would accrue in the future from recurrent flooding. The way we looked at this was to say if these damages were unmitigated, that if nothing was done beyond what's on the current slate of programs, what would be the cost in terms of financial losses in today's dollars? Because this is a stream of damages and benefits over time, we have to bring it into today's dollars so that we get a way of comparing the two. If we look at the estimates, it suggests that we are looking at between $4.6 and $5.9 billion worth of damages from 2021 to 2069 if recurrent flooding is not mitigated in Virginia Beach. If we look at the ripple effects of that, in other words, the financial damages ripple through the economy, lowering economic output and employment, we can see that the damages increase to $6.1 to $7.9 billion in today's dollars. The easiest way we can communicate this is looking at the benefit cost ratio. In other words, for every dollar of investment, how much damage is mitigated. And this works out to be 1 to 13. For every dollar of investment, you mitigate approximately $13 in financial losses. If you include the ripple effects, this increases to 1 to 19 or 1 to 20. So in other words, for every dollar of investment in the current and proposed infrastructure program that is related to the infrastructure referendum, you would see roughly $19 to $20 worth of benefits with regards to flood damage that is mitigated. So how do we approach this? Well, first we start off with the estimates from the Dewberry report. They use hazardous modeling, which is a tool developed by the federal government to look at natural hazards and the damages associated with natural hazards such as sea level rise, flooding, earthquakes, and so forth. It's a very widely accepted tool, and they calculate the average annualized loss over the study periods that are associated with the current sea level rise scenario, a 1.5 foot sea level rise scenario in 2040 to 2059, and then a 3 foot sea level rise scenario in 2060 to 2069. How do we approach this from a modeling perspective? Because we want to be relatively conservative in our approach, we also want to make sure that our results are robust to changes in the assumptions. So given the time constraints, we modeled two scenarios. First, we took the time value of money or the discount rate from the federal government at 7%. That is established by the Office of Management and Budget. We used the Congressional Budget Office's in forward-looking inflationary expectations. And then when you're looking at economic impact analysis, the question is how much money leaks out of the local economy. So if you let a contract, and that's to a design firm in Richmond, that money leaks out of the Virginia Beach economy and has a less of an economic impact in Virginia Beach, vice hiring a local firm, which then spends its money in the local economy and has a larger direct impact. The alternative scenario looks at a lower discount rate according to the Water Resources Development Act of 1974. That's updated annually for water projects in the United States. We assume a higher rate of inflation that we detail in the report, and we assume more significant leakages. So if you could think that we're saying more of this money leaks out of Virginia Beach, and then that lowers the overall economic impact. We then take our results and essentially test them for validity by increasing the discount rate significantly. That is, we are taking a lower value with regards to future damages, so we're discounting them more. We're exploring higher rates of inflation, and then we actually say, what if the infrastructure is not as effective as proposed? What if you only mitigate 50% of the projected impacts? What if you mitigate only 25%? And the reason we did this is, if in the worst case scenario that we could come up with, where you build infrastructure that is only 25% effective, does it still make sense? Even though we recognize that competent engineers would not build infrastructure that only works 25% relative to its proposed amount. So that's how we essentially looked at the question of efficiency and effectiveness. So the way you look at this is, we looked at the present value, in other words, taking future damages and bringing it into current dollars. And we looked at it through two scenarios. So you can see here that in the 21 to 2039 study period, that essentially damages from recurrent flooding in present value are between $826 million and $1.1 billion. And this increases dramatically over time. And why is that? Because as sea level rise increases, you get more recurrent flooding. As you get more recurrent flooding, you get more damages. That damage increases in the out years of the study period. If we look at the net present value, the question is, if you build the infrastructure, you incur costs. And so you have to offset the damages that you mitigate relative to the cost of actually building the infrastructure. And if you do that, you could see here we test the sensitivity by looking at different levels of mitigation. That at 100% mitigation, under the baseline scenario that I described, that the net present value of losses is approximately $4.2 billion. That is, what are the benefits with regards to reducing damages versus the costs? And it turns out to be positive, and a positive $4.2 billion over the study period if the infrastructure works as proposed. If the infrastructure is only 50% effective, then as you can see in the middle blue bar, that yields approximately net present value of $2 billion. So $2 billion more of benefits with regards to building the infrastructure if it only works at a level of 50% of proposed. So we looked at the benefit cost ratios with regards to financial damages. Our concern would be if these benefit cost ratios were closer to 1 than greater than 1. And this is essentially our stress test of our estimates that we put together. And so if you see at 25% mitigation, which I've already described, that's infrastructure that's only 25% effective relative to its proposed effectiveness, you could see that for every dollar invested, you yield between $3.3 and $3.5 in benefits. And benefits are defined as damages avoided from flooding. And this accelerates upward to the proposed effectiveness of the infrastructure, where you're looking for every dollar of investment, you're avoiding $13 to $14 in flooding damages. So the question is, what is the economic impact? So you have these financial losses. We then take the financial losses and we model how those financial losses would ripple through the Virginia Beach economy, because this is not just a financial impact, it's a reduction in economic activity. It creates job loss that we detail in the further report. And you could see that by modeling economic impact, you end up with higher levels of damage estimates on average over the study periods. And so in the Dewberry report, you end up with $349 million annually in the last study period. When you model the economic impact, it takes that $349 million of annual average losses, and it ripples out and creates almost $500 million in total financial plus economic impact in the out years of the study period. So again, we construct the net present value. We look at, in today's dollars, after discounting over time, the benefits in terms of flooding mitigation and the cost of construction, and weigh those two. And here you can see that if the infrastructure projects operate as proposed, that you're looking at net present value, that is the positive benefits associated with the project, between $6.1 and $7.9 billion over the study period. And even in the worst case scenario, you're still generating between $1.2 and $1.6 billion worth of positive impact to the Virginia Beach economy relative to the unmitigated loss scenario. So if you look at the benefit to cost ratios, which is the simplest way to think about this, for every dollar invested, what is the benefit in terms of economic impact, damages avoided, you would end up somewhere between 4.8 in the worst case scenario to 19. So for every dollar invested, you avoid direct and indirect and induced losses between 4.8 and $19. So, and remember, the 4.8 is essentially generated by assuming that the discount rate is higher, that the infrastructure projects are much less effective, and the inflation rate is much higher. So that is essentially the stress test to establish the lower bound of the scenario. So at the end of the day, we looked at this in the time we have provided. We were provided great support by Virginia Beach Stormwater, and we thank them for all the answers to the queries that we had. We estimate that for every dollar invested, if the infrastructure project passes, it will mitigate between $4 and $19 worth of damages to the Virginia Beach economy. And this seems relatively robust, given that we have stressed it with very non-conservative assumptions. In other words, we've looked at assumptions that are out the bounds of normality with regards to this type of analysis. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm happy to take questions.
Oh, wow. That compelling. Thank you.